So, if you've been in the espresso community, it's been kind of hard to miss the concept of coffee water. And so, third wave water is probably the most well known of the companies that makes these little packets that you're supposed to add to your water. And they're supposed to add just the right mix of minerals to make the best espresso possible. And they make a few different varieties of their little mixes. I have the espresso machine profile here, and there's other companies that do this as well. So I've also got a pack of coffee water that I got off of Amazon. And again, mineral packs for brewing coffee. So, they make a few different versions of the third wave waters. I don't know if coffee water makes a bunch of different versions or not, but since I'm going to be doing some espresso work, I wanted to see, does this make a big difference? I've got a friend that he started using the third wave water for his coffee, and he swears up and down it's a big deal. Now, in this video, I'm going to do limited taste testing because, if you've watched any of my other videos, I don't put a ton of weight on subjective taste testing simply because I'm not saying it's invalid for an individual. It's just not a very portable type of analysis. But I do want to look at, what I can see about what these things do to your water and the difference between, water that has been treated with one of these packets and something out of the tap. I've got a bunch of distilled water. I've also got some Evian spring water. I'm going to have my tap water and my filtered water from my refrigerator. And I figured we'd run some tests and just see what's going on with these. Now, before I go any further, a big props to third wave water. I actually found in doing some research on this stuff that the guy that runs the company actually has provided the ingredients, the recipes. So if you want to make this stuff yourself, I will roll in links and some stuff on the video to show you how you can actually make this stuff yourself, because it's very, very simple. The ingredients list on the espresso machine profile is magnesium sulfate, calcium citrate, and potassium bicarbonate. And so this is just some stuff to provide a little bit of magnesium and calcium for the water and some pH buffering to get the pH in the right range for coffee. And so both of these are based on some recommendations from the SCA, the Specialty Coffee Association, on kind of water hardness and mineral content and pH for water for coffee and espresso. And they're kind of designed to be, targeted to get your water to that kind of goal. I do believe both of these are meant to be added to distilled water, because distilled water typically will have no minerals because of the distillation process. It does say you can also use it on reverse osmosis or filtered water, but distilled water, I believe, should have the lowest mineral content, and so you're basically just getting the impact of these packets. If you're adding it to tap water, you're going to have all the other stuff that your tap water has in addition to these, and a lot of filters don't get out everything, so they can only filter out usually particulates of a certain size, and so often you can be left with some things like chlorine and other stuff that may be in your water, fluoride, junk like that. And one of the reasons I do want to look at these is because the cost. Tap water is extremely cheap, and running that through a filter is extremely cheap, to the point where in most developed countries, the cost of water out of the tap is marginally nothing. I mean, you're looking at, fractions of a penny per gallon most places, and when you look at how much water you might use in a month for making espresso, it's approximately zero. So doing these, it adds some cost, it adds some hassle. You got to keep track of your water. So I want to look at what's in these as far as what do they do and what's the real measurable difference in the water between using water that's been treated with these packets and tap water. And so let's look at some of the tools I'm going to be using to test this stuff. And this is actually the TDS meter from third wave water. And so I figure, this is what they actually sell to people. And it operates on a different principle. It actually uses, I believe, electrical conductivity to measure the total dissolved solids, because that'll change how water conducts electricity. So it's a different way to test for TDS. I have a digital pH meter. So this is a very good digital pH meter. It looks a little damp in there. That's because you actually have to keep these a little damp during storage. And so again, very good meter. This actually comes with a couple of standards for calibration for different pH levels. And so I've got it calibrated so we can get a really good measure of the pH. I've got some cheap Amazon test strips for drinking water. And now these, these things are supposed to test for like a bazillion different things: water hardness, chlorine, iron, copper, lead, nitrates, fluoride, all kinds of stuff. This thing is supposed to have tests for. However, I'm not sure how good these things are, so I went ahead and I also bought a pool testing kit that will also test for chlorine, pH, alkalinity, calcium hardness, and some other things. And so I just mostly wanted to make sure that I got some good consistent data. And so, I've got all these tests, and so I'm going to be doing these tests on my tap water, water that goes through my water filter in my refrigerator. I'm going to be testing some Evian spring water, and I'm going to be testing distilled water, and distilled water that's been treated with both the third wave water and the coffee water. And then I'll probably do a taste test between the third wave water and my normal water, which is just filtered water from my refrigerator, to see if I can taste any difference. Because for me personally, that's the only test at the end of the day that's going to matter to me. And so that's the only taste test that I'm going to do. I'm going to taste test the third wave water versus my usual filtered water.
So before we get to our test, let's try to think about what we should get from our water if we want to make good espresso. And so the best source that people usually refer to is the Specialty Coffee Association, and they've put out a water quality handbook that talks about what they recommend when it comes to water. And the SCA actually just starts off with, why water matters. And they do talk about that the primary focus overall was historically to make sure that coffee equipment, the machines themselves, remained in good working order, that they didn't get scale buildup, that they didn't get blockages, and, that your water wasn't acidic and causing corrosion. So those were kind of the primary considerations when building water formulas. Now, past this, they do get into flavor and aroma, what the water tastes like, what it smells like, and that could potentially have some big impact on coffee. But that is secondary to, you don't want your water damaging your machine with scale buildup or corrosion. They then detail the optimum water composition and why they drew the conclusions they did about what they recommend. And again, their two main perspectives are technical, which is minimizing maintenance and reducing replacement or repair cost and downtime. And then secondly, the sensory aspects, the flavor, the aroma of the coffee. Now, they go through a lot of technical detail of alkalinity and water hardness and how that builds up scale on machines at temperatures and different things like that. They also go into the sensory perspective, talking about the influence of water hardness on extraction and how alkalinity affects perceived acidity and things like that. So I will also say that a lot of their sensory information comes from, obviously, subjective testing and conclusions drawn by other people, such as for water hardness, they reference the 2016 World Brewers Cup and a book from Hendon on water for coffee. And they even have a lot of good charts on this stuff. And, here they've got a citation of Scott Rao's book and the different areas that people have recommended that water be at with respects to total hardness and alkalinity in historic research or just subjective testing. Now, at the end of the day, this all boils down into the Water for Brewing Standards from the SCA website. And it's actually much less defined than I think a lot of people might think. There's very little on the specifications of the water itself. Basically, it needs to be clean, fresh, and odor-free. It shouldn't contain any chlorine. They do have some acceptable ranges for calcium water hardness and alkalinity with a target pH of 7, but really anything between 6 and 8 should be good. Now, whenever it comes to testing these things, The SCA in their Water Standards Handbook does disclose the preferred measurement methods, or what is the appropriate test for alkalinity, water hardness. So basically what this comes down to, it says in practice, this means that a solution is added drop by drop to a specified amount of water until a color change occurs. This is a titration method, or a drop test. And this is the same method that the Taylor kit that I am using in this video uses. So I am using the standard methods that are outlined in the SCA Water Quality Handbook. So my test should be fairly valid and consistent with their recommendations.
All right, so if we're going to be testing coffee water, we're going to have to mix up some coffee water. So both of these systems, both the third wave and the coffee water, they give you a little packet, and each packet is 4 gallons. So I got a couple of gallons of water here. So I've got a Sharpie to mark. So let's call this one TW, and this one CW, third wave, and coffee water. Take our little coffee water packet. See if we can open this up without losing any, man. This is from Target, and they fill these things up plumb full. All right, so get all of our 11 herbs and spices in there. There she goes. We're making water, boys. Say boys. I think there's like one woman that watches the channel. All right, so there's third wave water. So put the cap back on, then you mix it until you don't see any crusties left over. I'm going to give that a bit to sit, and I'll come back and mix it. Let's do the coffee water. Coffee water packaged in Taiwan, whereas your third wave water says it's made in USA. Probably worst things in the world to get in packets from Taiwan. Sure, got no problem with that. Now, what the heck we got here? We've got 2 packets. What's with the 2 packets? We got 2 packets. Why are there 2 packets? Pour packets. So we add them both. Add 1 packet A and 1 packet B. So we have both of these. So this one has mag sulfate, calcium citrate, sodium chloride. This one has sodium bicarbonate and sodium chloride. So there are a little different, the 2 systems apparently. A little bit of difference in these. So let's get the coffee water one going and just figure out what the heck. I don't know. I think the packets are, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but they're a little too sturdy, because when you're tearing them open, as you're tearing, it's going to be kind of easy to flip this crap everywhere. Rarely do you say, hey, that's too heavy duty, but that one I think is a little too heavy duty. So let's get the cap back on. All right, and then we got to mix these up. So I'm going to mix these up, and then we'll get to testing and see what happens. So let me give you a little bit of first impressions on these. So the third wave water here looks a little cloudy, and I'm going to probably let these sit, overnight or something, just to let them mix properly. The coffee water, though, let me see if I can get this camera to show that. It's got little cruddies in it that aren't dissolving really well. And so both of these, a better method to mix these might be to, I would say maybe you want to put them, get a good clean, I don't know, really a stainless pan, or maybe a Teflon coated pan if you're worried about iron from the stainless steel getting into your water. But, warming it up, or even, I don't know, putting a little bit of warm water in with this stuff. Again, if you're using distilled water and you're really worried about getting stuff mixed in that's not supposed to be in there, take some of the distilled water and warm it in the microwave, or again, on the stovetop in a stainless pan or a Teflon nonstick pan to get it warm, and maybe mix these things in so that they'll dissolve a little better. Because right now, and again, it might be hard to tell, but there's little floaties in there. And I don't like little floaties in my water. So I don't know, people say stuff like, it ain't stupid if it works, but sometimes even if it works, it still feels stupid. We got this stuff in a water bath. We're doing a little bit of sous vide action to warm these things up to maybe 100 degrees. So I'm going to let them sit here for a while and let them warm up, and then we'll see if the minerals dissolve a little bit better, because after a few hours, there's still a little bit of chunkiness, and I figured it might just be too cold in here. So we're going to warm them up, see if that helps. Quick update. These have cleared up quite a bit.
after they were warmed up. And again, I've just got this up to like 100-degree bath, so they're not hot at all. Yeah, cleared up quite a bit, so that definitely helped. So I strongly recommend, if you're going to be doing this stuff, use warmer water. That way that stuff dissolves better. So let's look at the data from the test. And I was actually kind of surprised at how well my tap water measured on all these tests. So in this little table, I've got all the water set up, and I also in column B have the SCA guidelines and their ranges specified. And so what I found is that all of the waters I tested were in an acceptable range for pH, no matter how I tested that. So the digital pH gauge, everything measured between 6.8 on the low end for the distilled water, and the highest was my tap water at 7.5. The coffee water and the third wave were a little under 7.5. All of these corresponded pretty well to the pH measurements that I got from the Taylor kit. So everything with pH measured within 1/10 of a point, no matter how I tested it. The third wave water TDS meter did give me decent data, and the distilled water obviously measured a 0. Everything else was in mostly a fairly tight range, with the exception of the Evian water, which tested at 192. So that mineral water, that spring water, really did have a much higher concentration of dissolved solids in the water. Everything else, though, was really close, within 10% of each other. So total dissolved solids was really very little difference between all of these waters. So also, none of the waters tested at all for chlorine, whether available chlorine or total chlorine. There was no chlorine in anything, so that's reassuring. Again, that is one of the SCA's items of scrutiny, that you don't want any chlorine in your water. I didn't find nothing tested for the lowest level at all. Where there were some differences was on alkalinity and hardness. So the SCA recommends anywhere from 40 to 70 parts per million calcium carbonate, and that is a measure of water alkalinity. The distilled water basically measured a 0. The way the drop test works, it changes by drop, and the very first drop made the color change, which means it's basically a 0. Same thing on water hardness. It basically measured a 0. But across the other waters, only the coffee water tested within the recommended range here. And so on this chart, you can see that the third wave water actually measured a little low. Now, it wasn't that far off. The way the drop test works, each drop is 10 parts per million. So with the third wave water, if it would have gone one more drop, it would have measured the same as the coffee water. So that's not really that big a miss. The tap waters also weren't that high. I mean, they were about twice as high on the alkalinity. So one thing that I actually thought about doing is I could actually, take my filtered tap water, mix it with 50% distilled water, and that should put the alkalinity right in the middle of the SCA recommended range. Now, the Evian measured way, way more alkalinity than anything else. It also had the highest total dissolved solids, so clearly that mineral water, well, that means something. It is spring water. It is a natural water source. It contains a lot more minerals than the other waters. So on the last area, water hardness, the SCA recommends anywhere from 50 to 175 parts per million calcium carbonate. Again, it's a water hardness scale. It is a different thing than the alkalinity test, even though there is some correlation between those numbers. The distilled water tested a 0. The Evian was much higher than everything else, but then my tap water, my filtered tap water, the coffee water, and the third wave water all measured within the acceptable ranges for the SCA standards. And so this really did lead to a very interesting kind of outcome, which is this. My tap water and my filtered tap water out of the refrigerator are almost SCA heritage quality waters. The only thing that they miss is that they are a little high on alkalinity. And if I wanted to adjust those, basically I could just cut my filtered tap water maybe 70-30 or 50-50 with distilled water, and that would bring the water hardness and the alkalinity down basically in a linear proportion. So like if I went 50-50 on tap water and distilled water, I'd end up with water that had an alkalinity measure of approximately 60 and a hardness measure of like 65. And that would put me in a great range compared to the SCA recommended standards. So with all the water testing, what's again most interesting to me is that the SCA water standards with my water is not that big a deal. It's not some dramatically different water than what I'm getting out of the tap. Now, the last thing before I move on to taste testing is this. I did throw out those test strips. During my testing, what I found is that they were completely unreliable. They were just a waste of money. And so I did record a bunch of that data, and I immediately just threw it in the trash. It wasn't worth anything because mostly none of the tests showed anything. And I was a little disappointed because the test strips had a lot of other elements that it was testing for. And one of the big things that you got to worry about with tap water are the things that you don't know, right? One of the advantages to using coffee water or third wave water is that you're starting with distilled water with nothing in it, and then it should only contain what you add. Now, with my tap water, I only know what I test, and there could, in theory, be all kinds of other things in that system, contaminants, copper from pipes, iron, on the bad negative side, lead or bacteria or who knows what, right? And I can only test for so much. So with the tap water, I was hoping that those test strips might indicate some things, but they didn't show anything for the most part. Basically, the pH didn't read anywhere close to my other two methods. The water hardness didn't measure anywhere close to the other methods, and nothing else showed anything. So that's why you don't see that data on my tables, and I don't have any charts for it because it was garbage. With that said, let's get into the taste test.
So just realized that I filmed taking shots and all my procedures, except for I apparently never hit the record button. So that's a shame. You'll just have to trust me. So, by the way, this test was done on a new coffee that I tried. So it's not my usual, but it is basically a medium kind of roast coffee, which unfortunately definitely was different than my normal coffee because it's way more expensive than what I usually drink. And I really, really, really didn't want to like it, but I kind of do. That sucks. I pulled 2 shots back to back as fast as possible. I'd actually pre-ground and weighed 2 different doses, 18 grams in, around 41, 42 grams out in about 30 seconds. I pulled the first shot here with the treated water, the second shot with my regular filtered water out of the refrigerator. And I did that, again, back to back as quick as possible. I had to purge the water out of the machine in between, so it took maybe a couple of minutes between one shot and the other. And I've been doing a taste test, and again, I just realized that the camera wasn't recording, so here's my results on the taste test. If there's any difference at all, it is tiny. I have not really been able to conclusively convince myself that there is a difference here. Part of me wants to say maybe the treated sample is ever so slightly smoother, but I mean, if you give this to me in a blind test, boy, I don't know. That again, it's not a blind sample. I know that this is treated, but it is very small to the point that I am not even sure that it's there. I could, again, if I were really hard pressed, I'd say maybe the untreated water had ever so slightly more acidity. I think, if anything, that would be my final conclusion. Now, is that actually the case? I don't know. I mean, because again, we are talking about such a small difference that I am not 100% convinced that it's even there and that it's not just in my head. So, is it worth it to me? Look, I'm about to, take whatever espresso I make and make a cappuccino with it. I don't see any way that any difference that I'm tasting could ever hold up once you add milk or anything else to these things. Now, if you're doing straight espresso or Americanos, possibly this would be something you might explore and test for yourself. Because again, for me, I'm going to say, yeah, I don't know, maybe there's a difference, but it's minuscule. And in a cappuccino or a latte, no way am I going to worry about even trying to figure out whether I think there's a difference. But I could see that somebody else who's doing something different might think there's a significant difference that you care about here. And so as far as taste testing notes, I'm always skeptical of taste tests. But since I know a lot of people want them, there's my impressions. If there's a difference, I would lend it toward maybe the untreated has a bit more acidity, maybe the treated is a bit smoother. However, I would not put any weight on that myself because the difference is so small that I am not convinced that it's actually real and that it is not just placebo effect going on with me. And again, that is me stretching to find a difference between these two for you. So those are my thoughts. All right, well, let's try to get some conclusions on all this and what we found. So, I tested my tap water. I tested filtered water from my tap. I tested the coffee water mineral packs. I tested the third wave water espresso machine profile packs. And for funsies, I threw in a bottle of Evian just to make sure that we could find differences that surely exist and to give you kind of a standard that you could reference because you should probably be able to find Evian anywhere. The testing that I did used basically the same standard tests that the SCA recommends, and I looked for the same things that the SCA says should matter when it comes to water quality that you should check. Surprisingly, my tap water is not far off from SCA quality water. It's got a little more hardness, but I could basically cut my tap water with 50% distilled water and be right in the middle of the range for the SCA water profile. The coffee water and the third wave water, they seem to do what they propose to do. They do get your water pretty much into the SCA range. Do I think that that's worth it? Here's what I'll say about these things. My taste testing, I couldn't really find a big difference. So for me personally, given that I like milk drinks because I'm kind of a wuss, I don't know that it's really worth it for me to mess with it. Because I think any difference in flavor that these things are going to be able to influence are going to be so small that they're going to be vastly overwhelmed in the drinks that I make. I don't think I'm as skeptical about people saying that they can taste the difference with this stuff as I am some things in coffee land. One of my best friends, he thinks it's quite noticeable. So, I'm I'm open to people thinking that this stuff makes a difference for them, especially if, again, you're drinking your espresso straight or you're doing Americanos or something where the flavors are going to be much more direct from the espresso rather than influenced by milk or sweeteners or other flavorings that you're putting in your beverages. The cost is not unreasonable considering with espresso how much water you're using. It's not very big. I think that they've got it priced reasonably. I paid $17 for the third wave water, and that's for 12 sticks. So, you're looking at roughly $1.50 for the treatment, and then you add in the cost of a gallon of distilled water. it's not extravagant. It's, probably the same cost as like a gallon of milk. The coffee water was much cheaper on a per treatment basis. Paid about $20, and that comes with 25 packs. So quite a bit cheaper for the coffee water. They mostly do the same things. The ingredients are extremely similar between these two things. Um, I don't know if it's worth making this stuff yourself, because it's certainly possible. And maybe if you want to try it and you really get into it, you're really going to use it forever, then, maybe I would get the stuff and just make it myself. If you have a milligram scale, that should be pretty easy to do. But I think to try it, yeah, it's probably just better off just to buy it. That way you don't have to have a big pile of bulk stuff. Because again, you got to buy a bunch of Epsom salt and other stuff, citric acid, that, it's going to be expensive to buy and you're going to have a whole bunch of it. So I don't know that making it yourself makes sense until you're really committed to it. So that said, overall, you've seen my results. You've seen the results of the testing. You've seen the taste testing. I don't know that I'm going to be messing with this. I'll probably use up, I've got it. So, there's the thing. You buy it. 12 gallons of water is going to last me a long time. It may be 6 months before I go through that much water in my espresso machine. I don't even know if I'll use it then. I haven't done the math. Then you add in another 25 gallons of coffee water. I don't know. That's a lot. It does require that you use distilled water. I can't just use water out of my tap, because then I'll have way too much minerals in it. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm even going to keep using this stuff, because I'd have to buy a whole bunch of distilled water, and it just doesn't make that much of a difference. So that's my thoughts and my analysis of the coffee water. Draw your own conclusions. I'm not going to try to tell you that it doesn't do anything. I just don't think it does enough for me personally. So that's it. That's the video. You give me your own feedback back down in the comments. Let me know what you think about it, and I appreciate your time. Thanks.